Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. My name's Alex Davis. I'm the founder and main author behind Pushing Back the Shadows. So in today's episode, I wanted to look at something that I think is really quite a fundamental concept when you're dealing with depression and with anxiety. And that in itself is feeling like you're a fraud. Now, this actually comes a little bit from the imposter syndrome, which is something that was kind of coined in 1978 by two psychologists, Pauline R. Clance and Suzanne A. Imes. And it's effectively an inability to kind of internalize your own accomplishment. You dismiss the accomplishment as being kind of a fluke. Usually you'd hear people say things like, oh, I just got lucky, or oh, it was nothing. Kind of undervaluing the things that they've done, the achievements and accomplishments that they've had. Now, I did a little bit of research into this because I'd heard about the imposter syndrome, but I'd never really kind of taken the time to look into it that much. And it came up with a number of different symptoms or signs that you are kind of struggling with that syndrome. And it's things like perfectionism, overworking, a fear of failure, discounting praise, and undermining your own achievements. And I think when you stop and you kind of look at depression and anxiety, I think you find that that's something that realistically you would see very, very often. It's certainly something, looking back at my own struggle, something that I've seen a lot in terms of my own depression, my own anxiety, and it's something that we can recognise kind of throughout the spectrum, if you like, whether you're kind of diagnosed with major depression or mild depression or whatever, however your depression or anxiety would manifest itself, it's something that kind of underlies everybody's condition. We kind of have a way of convincing ourselves that we're not good at whatever it is we do, whatever that might be, whether it's manual labour, whether it's, say, on the telephones in customer service, whether it's in an online community, whatever we do, we convince ourselves that we aren't good enough. Does that sound familiar? Is that something that you found that you struggle with? Actually being able to sit back, look at what you've accomplished, and think, yeah, I did well. Yeah, I'm good at that. Yeah, I did that to a good standard. It's kind of something that I've separated a little bit with depression and with anxiety. It's almost has its own way of manifesting itself within both conditions. And I just want to take a moment and have a look at those and see whether you find this familiar. It may be that you don't recognise this at all. It may be that it's something that you've never really thought about. But it's something that's weighed on my mind for quite a long time now. So looking at depression itself, it's very easy to fall into the mindset of, oh, there's no point, I'm not good at that, I can't do it. And it's something that a lot of people do get themselves trapped in. A lot of conversations that I have with people, a lot of them do say, well, what's the point? It's never going to succeed, I'm never going to amount to anything. And it is a very common phenomenon, this imposter syndrome. Depression kind of takes away the kind of internalized sense of achievement. It says that there is no point, it's not as good as we think it is. Why bother? Because realistically, we're never going to amount to anything. We're never going to succeed. We're never going to be good enough. And certainly if you go onto, say, Google and you Google depression quotes, a lot of them have that underlying theme, that we aren't good enough, that we'll never be good enough. It's almost one of depression's biggest weapons. Then on the flip side, with anxiety, you get the sense that you're going to be found out, that you do feel like you are a fraud, and there's no way that you're going to be good enough, but people are going to see through it. You kind of feel like you're just barely holding it together, barely pretending that you actually know what you're doing. And that in itself is something that I've found to be quite telling, particularly in my own struggle. And I'll tell you about that in just a second. But first off, just have a sit back for a second and think about what I've just described. That almost fraudulent feeling where you think that maybe you're not quite good enough, that you'll never be good enough. Is that something that you recognise? Is that something that you think, yeah, that describes me to a T? Let me tell you a little bit about how that manifested itself for me. You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. Okay, so to give you a little bit of background, as most of you know, those of you who've been following both the show and the blog for some time, you'll know that I used to work on the phones for a bank, and that's where the bulk of my mental health problems actually seem to kind of come to the forefront. I'm not entirely sure how long I've had these problems, but they certainly seem to come to light a lot more when I was in this particular job. And it's one of those things, just to give you a little bit of background into the role itself. You're on the phones, you're dealing with banking inquiries, and to begin with, it started off, I was just on like the savings lines. So you had a fair number of calls, but not loads of calls, because in the past couple of years, savings rates have been absolutely awful in the UK. But you'd be dealing with customer inquiries about their interest rates, what they'd want to do when their fixed rate accounts were coming up for maturity, and other things like that, a few transactions, change of address, that sort of thing. But then, as I got more into the job, they started introducing more like the general telephone banking lines into that as well, and we were getting trained up for like the main high street banking lines. And in all honesty, that was bombarding, to say the least. You know, you get, I think, in one 8-hour shift, so roughly 6 hours on the phone if you include breaks, I managed to take just over 100 phone calls. And that in itself, it may not sound like a lot for a 6-hour shift, but given that every inquiry you'd have to do something with, it did amount to a lot. So it got very busy, very hectic, and there were a lot of things that you were doing. I mean, we were moved from just doing savings to doing general banking, which included current accounts, savings accounts, credit cards, mortgages, change of address, and anything and everything that you can think of to do with those things. You know, charges on accounts, opening new accounts, closing accounts, fraudulent transactions. And granted, a lot of these were kind of passing people through to different departments, like the fraud team, like the mortgages team. But realistically, being the first point of call and effectively being the kind of switchboard operators, you had to know what you were talking about. There were a lot of things that you were expected to kind of resolve at first touch. That was kind of their mantra, if you like, first touch resolution. So the customer comes through, they speak to one person and one person only, and they get the problem or the query or whatever it is they want to do resolved at that first point of contact. And so realistically, when you are sat at the other end of the phone and you have the phone call come through, you need to know A, how to deal with the call, B, how to work the systems, because obviously being a bank, you have to take them through kind of that level of security so you can verify them. And you have to know kind of the wording you're supposed to use, because apparently you're not really supposed to call it security anymore. It's some kind of verification, because it sounds less daunting. If you can hear the kind of the sarcasm in my voice there, it's because we didn't agree with that in the slightest, but that's another story. And then you had to know kind of how to service the call, whether you were to deal with it yourself, and if so, where you found everything that you were looking for, or you had to know where to send them, which team to put them through to. And realistically, when you go to transfer a call, there's at least 30, 40 different places that you can send them. So you really had to know what you were talking about. And it was very, very daunting, because going from that small savings team, where you were only dealing with 5 different things, to that large general banking line and having to deal with 20, 30 different queries, it was very easy to feel overwhelmed by that. So that was effectively what I was doing when I was there. And obviously I can't mention the company itself, but I always felt like I was just getting by. I wasn't really great at the job. I did enough that I could seem like I was coping, but I never really felt as though I was excelling at it or anything like that. And the call would come through, I'd handle it, and I'd sit there and I'd think, oh, well, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done this. And it's very easy, especially when you get the feedback from your managers. Everybody typically is good at picking up what you should have done differently, and not necessarily great at picking up on what you did brilliantly. And especially with depression and anxiety, that can be something that is sorely needed, that kind of affirmation of what you do well, as opposed to what you're doing wrong, because you're your own harshest critic. You do pick up what you're doing wrong. So I never really thought that my performance there amounted to anything. And so it came as a bit of a shock when the manager whose team I was on was having to move a couple of people, and there was me and there was somebody else who came up for moving to a different team. And the manager that I went to was actually very, very quick to kind of say, oh, I want him. And I was sat there thinking, well, why? Why? What do I do that's great? And as it turned out, when I mentioned this to one of my colleagues, and actually a good friend of mine, she turned around and she said, well, do you not realise how good at the job you actually are? And I kind of thought, well, no, I don't. I don't know just how good I am, because realistically I don't think I'm very good at the job. I see every mistake I make, I see all the kind of clumsiness of how I handle certain situations, and I don't think I do quite that well. The fact that I took, for example, on my first couple of days of being live on the general banking calls, I took a complaint where the branch had actually lost £8,000 and the guy really, really needed that money to have been paid in. And I managed to take that complaint in, take a guy who was really ranting and raving and shouting, and turn it straight round, to the point where at the end of the call he thanked me and he said, you know what, you've handled that really well, thank you for everything that you've done. Or the fact that I got a card from a customer saying, thank you ever so much for what you've done, it's really, really appreciated, and the company is really lucky to have you. All those different things got undervalued in my head, because my depression was saying, well, do you know what, they're just being nice, you're not really as good as people are saying you are. And it's something that's very, very common with mental illness. You look at your achievements and you undervalue them. You feel like you are a fraud. And so after reading a couple of tweets, that was kind of where my thoughts came from for this particular episode. And as such, it's a very, very difficult thing to overcome. I mean, after all, you're fighting with your own head, it knows you better than anybody else. How do you overcome those feelings that you're a fraud? Well, I've got a few ideas on that particular vein, so let's tap into them. Let's have a look and see how you can overcome those kind of feelings of fakeness, that imposter syndrome. Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. So how do we overcome that? How do we, as mental health sufferers, overcome that feeling that we aren't good enough? It's a very difficult thing, really, to overcome, and I'll be honest with you, I have not mastered it yet. But it's something that can be done, but it's not something that we can do alone. At least not as far as I believe. See, one way that I try and overcome it is I listen to other people. I listen to what they're saying. And I think, well, actually, do you know what? Why would they say that? What possible reason would they have to lie to me? Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably thinking of 1,000 different reasons why somebody would lie to you. Whether it's so they don't hurt your feelings or whatever. But take a second and think about that. Why would somebody lie to you? Particularly in like an employment setting, if you're not doing a good job, your manager will tell you. They're not going to lie. They're not going to try and butter you up, because realistically, they are your manager. They're your boss. They know what they expect. They know what you're supposed to do. If you're not delivering, then they're going to tell you, aren't they? Why would they lie? Realistically, part of the way that I get through this is I try and look at the other perspective. It's something I've talked about in episode 17, The Power of Perspective, where sometimes somebody looking from the outside in on our situation, they can see things differently to the way we see them. With depression, with anxiety, we often think that we're not worth anything. And that in turn feeds into this imposter syndrome. But if you think about it, somebody on the outside looking in will see the worth that we can't see. Granted, it works both ways. Sometimes they won't see the worth. They'll see kind of a lesser thing than our actual worth. Lesser value is what I'm trying to say. It's great, isn't it, when your brain just kind of stops and misfires. But so sometimes they can see more worth in us than we can see in ourselves. It's true, isn't it? Sometimes having that outside perspective can have such a different viewpoint to us. So maybe that friend I mentioned who was telling me that I was really good at the job, maybe they were right. Okay, maybe they were a little bit biased, but they do say that in everything somebody says there will be a grain of truth in there somewhere. Even in the lies there'll be a grain of truth somewhere. Don't you think? So perhaps in order to get over the imposter syndrome, it's about recognizing that somebody else's perspective will have elements of truth in it. Granted, they're not going to be completely right, because nobody is completely right, but there will be elements of it where they are speaking the truth. So really, part of it is going to be training your brain a little bit, whether that's practicing mindfulness or whether that's just kind of trying to be more aware of those thoughts that you're having and challenging them, arguing with them, saying, do you know what? Why would they lie? Why would they tell me this if it wasn't true? And to go from there. You never know. You might surprise yourself. And as I say, it's one of the ways that I personally try and get through this. I challenge those thoughts and I say, well, look, why would that person say it if it wasn't true? If I know them, and I know them well enough, which I believe I do, why would they say it? It's a difficult thing to do, getting over that imposter syndrome, but it can be done. I'm still learning, I still get it wrong, and I still make mistakes. And yet, more often than not, I feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm not capable of doing what it is that I do. But the truth is I am. I am better than I perceive myself to be. I'm not the best of the best, but I'm definitely better than I perceive myself to be. So keep holding on. Keep persevering with what you do, because I guarantee you're not giving yourself enough credit. That's all from me for today. So you guys take care. You have a great week and a great weekend as well. And I shall catch you next week for the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. You take care. You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To find out more, head over to pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe to get all of our latest updates straight to your inbox. Alternatively, connect with us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AlexDavisPBTS, or you can visit us on Twitter at AlexDavisPBTS. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS to find out more.